Welcome back on CoffeeJUG. Today we're happy to host Mark Heckler with an incredible talk about Copilot. But before I give the stage to Mark, I want to give a special thanks to Ukrainian armed forces who continue to fight with Russian aggression day by day for our freedom. Also want to thank you to our community. Today we already organized more than 40 events and with more than 500 participants. And want to thank you to our organizers team, Andriy, Uliana, and Ivor, to our program committee member, Olesa and Alexei, and especially to our partners, Sobra and Grid Dynamics. Without you guys, it was quite hard to organize such a beautiful event like this. And to our community partner, JetBrains. Remember that we're gonna give you 2 licenses for free for the best questions. So be active and ask questions during this session. And join us in our social medias. Mark, the stage is yours.
Oh, thanks so much, Alexei, and everyone. Thanks for coming here. I'm going to go ahead and start the slides. Pardon me, I'm a little. I just was out in Las Vegas last week for Spring One and VMware Explorer, and I came back to the lovely Midwest of the central U.S. where everything grows, including all of the pollen. So, yay! So if I sound a little stuffed, it's only because I am. But yeah, so welcome, and it's so good to get together with everyone. Virtual events give us a chance and a way to get together when sometimes it's just not possible to travel and get there. Yeah, just happy to be here and happy to get together with our dear friends. So yeah, let's talk. So this is a little different talk than I normally do, not for maybe the reasons you might expect. And I'll get into that as we go, but I'm going to be taking a pretty different tack from a lot of what I do. I'll still be doing a lot of coding, but I'm going to be doing that with my Copilot. So, which brings us to the talk itself. Copilot is the name of the talk, or as I like to say, pair programming with an AI. Once again, my name is Mark Heckler. I'm a principal cloud advocate of Java and JVM languages with Microsoft, former Spring team member, but I moved over to Microsoft a couple of years ago during the pandemic. And I still work extensively with Spring, still work with a lot of my friends on the Spring team. I just have maybe a couple of circles that I bring together now, which is kind of awesome. I'll be going through all of this, and I'm not going to be in a big hurry because I think I have plenty of time, famous last words, but I think I have plenty of time to cover everything that I want to cover here today and still have tons of time for questions and answers at the end. But if for whatever reason you think of a question after you disconnect, that always happens to me 10 minutes after I walk away, I think of the best question or the best comment or just some feedback that I wanted to give. And by all means, if that happens to you, know that you're in good, bad, or whatever company. But please do reach out to me. Emails work. Twitter/X/whatever we're going to call it next month is better. So I'm on X now, Twitter, whatever, at MKHeck. If you don't follow me there, I guess I would ask why. Great content. I like to share tech stuff, flying stuff, etc. Which brings us to maybe the next point. A bit about me. I am an architect and developer by background. I'm also a developer advocate, which I always tell people I love to code, I love to talk, and you put those two things together and you typically somehow wind up with the developer advocate. So it's kind of the best of all worlds for me. I am also an author, a Java champion, Java 1 rockstar, Kotlin developer expert, and a licensed instrument rated pilot. That's the jumpsuit, right? So I do fly every chance I get. It's not my avocation, or it's not my vocation. It's my avocation. It's my hobby. I just enjoy getting up in the air and seeing things from a different, vastly different perspective than what you get here on the ground. So let's see, wrong key. So the latest book. This was a book that I wrote, solo authored last year, was released, I guess. On O'Reilly, Safari Books Online, as well as in your favorite bookstores. If you want to check it out, by all means do so. The link that's on the screen, bit.ly/springbootbook, will forward you to the O'Reilly site, and you can get a 7 to 10 day, I think, free trial of Safari Books Online. So you can check it and any other book in their vast catalog. You can check those out online for free. And of course, the book also has a Twitter or X handle, depending on what you prefer now. So follow the book at Spring Boot Book on Twitter. So here's the flight plan. Now, I should say that I guess a little bit of preface, because as a pilot, I think of things, and of course, we all have our different perspectives, right? But I think of things a lot of times in terms of aviation, including in the software development space. And I've been in software a lot longer than I've been flying aircraft. But there are aircraft that are certified for single pilot operations, and there are aircraft that are certified for dual pilot operations that require two pilots to be on the flight deck. And many times as developers, I find, and I've lamented this for a number of years, we take on a lot more responsibilities that are outside of our primary scope, our critical path, if you will, just because we're problem solvers. That's why most of us got into this field, because we see problems and we want to fix them. And we doggedly pursue a solution until we have one and we implement it. And then we look for ways to optimize it. That's just kind of how we're wired. However, many times what that finds us doing is trying to operate that two pilot aircraft in single pilot mode. It's not very productive. It takes us away from a lot of the things that we need to be doing to keep ourselves safe, to deploy properly, to maintain robust and resilient software. So at times like that, you look at it and think, okay, if it's a dual pilot operation aircraft, I should have a co-pilot, right? And the same thing goes with our software development process, because we typically, there are many cases we can fly solo, and that's perfectly fine. But there are many cases where a co-pilot will help with that, what we call crew management or workload management on the flight deck. So I'm taking this with a lot of aviation terminology, but you'll notice that there are a lot of very clear parallels to development. And that's what one of the many things that I love about flying. So we're going to start off with here's our flight plan for today. We're going to start off with a pre-flight briefing and clearance. First, you determine, is this trip really necessary? And then we'll talk about, if so, which co-pilot or co-pilots make the most sense for developers to take advantage of. Then we'll take flight. We'll write some code. We'll get some help writing some code. We'll do some testing, and we'll look at how perhaps a co-pilot or co-pilots can help us with deployments. And then we'll land. We'll bring it home. We'll do the after action briefing. We'll do a post-flight briefing and see maybe where things could be done better, or where we see things going for subsequent upcoming flights. And by the way, the disclaimer here is that at this time, so which co-pilots make the most sense, kind of how it makes the most sense to do a particular thing, that's at this very moment in time. That's as of, using my opinion, in my opinion. And again, this changes so rapidly. And all the other usual caveats we are going to add on top of those and layer on top of those for this particular talk. Pardon me. I mentioned that this is a little different approach for this talk than I usually take. And the reason being, when you're dealing with something that is as rapidly changing as generative AI, we're developers. We use tools all the time. We get updates, we get patches. We may have a different way of approaching things that we may find a new best practice, if you will. There are changes happening all the time, and that's one of the things that you can either embrace or not in our field. But typically, most of us look at change as a necessary evil at worst, or a welcome addition to our tool set at best, because we can do more things better, hopefully, over time. With generative AI, that rate of change is dramatically increased. And by dramatically, I'm not just talking about daily, because when you're dealing with a generative AI, what it does when you ask it or prompt it for something is it will, at that moment, look for the best answer, the best solution it can find, the best code completion, et cetera, it can find at that moment. And that changes each execution. So there will be times that literally, to give you an example, I have run through the code that I like to share with this. And of course, I change the things that I put into and take out of presentations, and I always have each time I give them. However, there's a consistent thread that typically runs through when I give a particular presentation. However, with generative AI, something that worked literally 1 hour ago will work slightly differently the next time you run it. And part of that I take on myself, because I use nightly builds of everything. I use the latest, greatest, most recently made available version of all the tools and all of the co-pilots and what have you. However, Part of that is just a matter of perhaps searching repositories and finding what comes up at the top of that search at that moment. So this changes. That's something to embrace, not to run away from, but it is something you need to be aware of as you go into it. So that's why I say I do this a little bit differently, because every time I run through this in whatever circumstances, even if I literally copy paste a prompt that I've used before, I may get a slightly different answer. So we'll see what we get today. So with the pre-flight briefing and clearance, we're going to first discuss, is this trip really necessary? Well, if you don't want to be left behind in the contrails, yes, this is actually necessary. I had somebody ask, and I will probably get this question again, but I had somebody ask, hey, is it really essential that we give something like Copilot, give access to it to junior developers, because they don't know enough to know when perhaps it's giving great responses or when it's a little off? Because all of the various different generative AI solutions can do what they call hallucinate. It may give you an answer that looks really good, or looks bad in certain cases, but generally looks really good. But it may be calling out an API that frankly doesn't even exist. So should we trust that, or should we give that to our junior developers, because maybe that will mess them up? You need to have a certain level of expertise, perhaps, is the argument to use this. And I would argue that if you wouldn't restrict your junior developers from using Stack Overflow or searching online, why would you restrict them from using perhaps an even more powerful tool? Just because at times it doesn't give them the answer that is perfectly applicable, or that maybe it's not even perfect and completely correct, but it, in many times, even in the worst of scenarios, can give them the spark that gets them moving much faster in a much better direction than perhaps they would have just by kind of fumbling around in a dark room. So yes, in my opinion, this trip is really necessary. Which copilots make the most sense for developers? I'm going to cover some of the aspects of that, some of the different ways that you can interact with Copilot or copilots. Generally, we're going to focus on GitHub Copilot today and the various ways of using it. And I can discuss after the fact kind of some of the other options and where their limitations and opportunities may lie. So we'll take flight, we'll get started, we'll code, we'll test, we'll deploy, or at least we'll get started down that path, and then we'll see kind of where things take us. So, and we'll come back for the landing. And I'm going to take a quick drink right now so that I can irrigate this throat. Perfect. Okay, so we're going to start as most Spring projects do, and again, this is talking about. I'm using Spring because it's what I know best and love best. But the same general principles will apply whether you're using Spring in Java, Spring in Kotlin, or just plain Java, or some other library or tool chain or framework with Java, or Python or JavaScript or whatever. But we're going to use the best stuff here, right? So I'm going to use Java as a language and Maven as the project. And I say best stuff, and anything on the screen here I consider to be kind of among the best. So we're going to use the current version of boot. I'm going to change this group to thehecklers.com. And we're going to change this from demo to Copilot. Copilot, spelling is tough. And we'll say this Copilot CoffeeJUG. Wow, spelling is really just terrible. Copilot for CoffeeJUG project for Spring Boot. Now I'm going to bring in just a very few dependencies. I'm going to bring in the web dependency so we can build an API. And I'm also going to bring in Actuator. It's just kind of a habit. We're probably not going to do anything with it today, but it's always good to have Actuator in there so we can report our production ready status with metrics and endpoints and useful information. I'm also going to bring in, let's see, what else? I want to bring in Timeleaf because I want to show you kind of how Copilot can work with generating or helping you, assisting you with creating your web, not APIs, but your web applications. I'm also going to database enable this with MongoDB, and I'm going to use test containers because that kind of facilitates the whole development process itself. So I'm going to generate this project now, and we'll save this down on our desktop, and I will go to that. Yeah, which screen? Too many screens here. All right, so let's bring that over. And it's just ignoring me. So let's see if I can bring this over. There we go. And let's open that up. And I'm going to open that. There we go. New terminal folder. And of course, it dropped that onto a different. That's fine. I'll just go ahead and use this. This is bigger. And I can embiggen this even more. Center this. We'll go into our CoffeeJUG list. Okay, now I'm going to use, for the purposes of today, Visual Studio Code Insiders Edition. And it says Insiders. It's not just for employees. It's just for if you want the latest, greatest nightly builds, access to all of the latest toys and tools. Highly recommended. I've never had any stability problems. Not saying there couldn't be any, but it's a very solid, stable, well-rounded IDE that gives you access to, again, the latest, greatest toys and tools. So I'm going to open my Palm just so we can take a look at it. And of course, this is our Maven build file. You can use Gradle, of course. I'm using Maven in this case, again, to keep things very straightforward and focus on the things specifically that I want to focus on versus all the extraneous, interesting, but certainly not on the critical path type of topics. So again, we see our dependencies here. Everything looks good there. Let's go ahead and open our application, main application class. I'm also going to go ahead and open the test containers application test class. And that's fine. I just like to show that it's there. It gives you the ability, again, to speed up your development process, development cycle. And I generally just kind of love incorporating that into the flow. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, I'm going to use a pretty simple example for our domain here. I'm going to create our domain is a developer, right? So we'll create the developer record in this case. And I'm going to be storing a list of our developers or all of our developers in MongoDB. So I annotate that record with that document. I'm going to create an ID field. And as you can see, when I start to type this, Copilot is already hard at work for me because I have the Copilot plugin, the GitHub Copilot plugin enabled in this IDE, this Visual Studio Code Insiders build. And it's prompting me to offer up options that can, as a senior or junior developer even, kind of give me a lead and kind of a jump on things. Now, I don't want to, again, keeping things simple today, so that's nice. I'm just going to keep this very, very clean and short, but it gives you some ideas, some prompts, and some suggestions on things that you might want to use. Now, I'm actually writing a little bit of code and very little. I'm going to try to, oddly enough, minimize the code that I write today for our time together. I'm going to lean on my Copilot to do a lot of that. Just as in the cockpit, I would try to focus on the approach that I'm flying, and the Copilot would be handling all the radio work and doing all the other things to set up for landing. So this is kind of what I'm doing, is leaning heavily on my Copilot, just as an example. And you'll find at different times in the development process, like all tools, you'll use it very much or you use it very little. But over time, you'll find a flow that works best for you within your existing workflow or your new workflow. I'm also going to create a developer repository and use the Spring Data repository construct here. This is an interface, and I like to just tighten that up. It's just a formatting preference. I'm going to extend the CRUD repository defined in Spring Data. I'm going to use that to store objects of type developer with IDs of type string. And if you notice, it did the code completion for me. Copilot did. And it gave me exactly what I wanted. I hate to use the term read my mind because that almost seems human and stuff. And this isn't. This is a generative artificial intelligence. But it works. It works really well when it works really well. So, and that is sufficient for us for now. So by defining this, by extending an interface defined in Spring Data, and by having a database driver on the class path, in our case, MongoDB, Spring Boot's auto configuration will know that we want to interact with the database, in this case, MongoDB. And it will create a proxy bean for us to interact with us with the data store on our behalf. So that gets us started, perhaps. So the next thing I want to do is just create a couple of controller classes. I'm going to call this our developer controller API. Let's see, API controller. That's probably better, right? API controller. And that's good. I'm going to make this a REST controller. And I'm going to now inject our developer repository as a repo, right? So we can access that. And of course, we can just generate the constructor here. And we'll inject that. And there we go. Now, what kind of API will we like to build? Now, I'm going to keep this, again, fairly simple. I'm going to just create a get mapping. And I want to maybe do a hello. And that gets us started. So public. And you see that it offers this up. And that's pretty good. I'm going to just accept what it offers up. Instead of hello Spring Boot, we'll say hello CoffeeJUG. And exclamation points, extra exclamation points to show the gravity of this, the importance of our meeting today, which is very important, right? I'm going to now create a little bit more typical endpoint, if you will. And instead of developers, of course, we can change this. I'm going to return what? Well, let's return an iterable of all developers. It's saying all devs. We can change this if we want. Change this to a convention we like. But again, it does a lot of this for us. And this is sufficient, I think, for now to get us running. The next thing I want to do, though, is let's go ahead and create another class. We'll create our developer web controller. And this will be a controller class. And we're going to use this perhaps to return a list of, let's say, a list of all developers in our data store as well. But we're going to make this a nice web interface. So I'm going to, at this point, let's see, private. That's good. So we'll inject that as well. And generic constructor, that works. And at this point, what I want to do is do a get mapping. And we'll just keep that. No, not hello. We'll just do that. Wow, it is just insistent. There we go. There we go. All right. So I'm going to define an endpoint here. We'll call this home. It's going to return a string called index. Now, I added time leaf to our dependencies, right? I wanted that capability to create a web application. And what is happening here by defining a controller, it will return a string here from a method. And when the time leaf template engine is engaged, when it's activated, it will look for an index.html file and load that up. So at this point, what I want to do is do a new file, right? We'll call this index.html. And it's asking, where do we want to put this? Now, I'm not going to put it in the typical place, well, the place where it's defaulting here, source, main, Java, etc. What I want to do is place this under source, main, resources. I went back too far there, under templates. And this is where the time leaf template engine will look specifically for our templates. So we'll create this there, and then let's get started. Now I'm going to comment this. And we'll say create a time leaf template to list all developers. Okay, so this hopefully will give Copilot enough to get started with. So it does, and I can do this, and it's going to import here our time leaf headers. So let's see, we do this. That looks pretty good, and that's fine. That's fine as well. Also fine. Yeah, that's looking pretty good here. Wow, that's not too bad, right? So now we just need and it's telling us there's a public code match detected in the recent suggestion. We can take a look and view all matches for this file and see where it's coming up. Now, as we see that it's actually pulling from another one of my bits of my code. There are also things here that it's looking for, but here is the code that it's matching. And that gives you a chance to see, well, look, if this looks like this is too close to someone else's and is copyrighted code, don't use it. That's perfectly fine, but it's giving you that warning. In this case, it's matching 4 references to public code, and you can find links, you can review this. This is nothing that looks very proprietary to me, so we're just going to leave this in place. All good. So with that, we actually don't have any developers in there. So let's go ahead and now create, if we can, I use a couple of different IDEs, so I sometimes get my key combinations mixed up. So we'll go back here and do this right. We'll we'll create a new Java class called our data loader. All right, and we'll make this a component. And notice that it put this actually where I didn't want it. It put this under templates. I'm going to just drag this up here and move this before I forget. Like that ever happens, right? And we're good there. Actually, I missed. I need to go, there we go. Move that one more. There, that's much happier. All right, so with our data loader, I want to, of course, inject our repository and generate the constructor. Only I really don't need to use this. I'm just using this at this point so I can create some data. So I'm going to do a repo delete all. And that's a good practice to get into. Even using test containers, you certainly don't need to do this if you spin up your container each time you're running container. However, you can leave it running and do different things. So I like to kind of do this as a best practice, but you have an option. Now I want to show you a different way to use Copilot, because up till now I've shown you kind of as it prompts you and guides you along while you code, which is wonderful. And in many cases, that's your optimal path. But at this point, I want to bring up the Copilot chat option, the chat window. Now, Copilot chat is a different plugin. And again, you have full access to that. It still uses Copilot behind the scenes, the same Copilot. It just gives you a way to kind of write a full prompt. And you can do that in comment in your code. You can do it here. So what I'm going to do is just do this. I'm going to say, create a list.of developer objects with uuid.random uuid.toString as the ID field and the names. Let's see. So Julien Dubois, that's my manager, also a former Spring team member at Microsoft. So we work really closely. We're happy to work with the Spring team on many things. I'll throw me in there just for comic relief. Igor, let's see if I can misspell this properly here. Spelling is a tough thing for me today. We'll throw in Dr. David Sire and Josh. Got to bring in Josh into the mix. Okay, so let's see what it does. Let's see what it gives us. Sure, here's how you can create a list using the random UUID as the ID field and the names you provided. That looks pretty good. So if I copy paste this, right, I'm just going to drop this in there. Oh, and I see that actually I have my imports there, and that's fine. I'll just delete those, put those. Oh, I think actually that's up there. So let's see if I have anything else. I just can't, spelling, it always jokes on names, but that's fine. So that looks pretty good. And we've got a repo save all. Let me reformat there. And that looks all right. Now, what I'd like to do, though, is kind of take this and make it a little neater, because there's no real reason to create an intermediate variable. So let's do a feed the list of developers to repo.save all without creating an intermediate variable. And let's see how it digests that. Sure, you can do that. Here, let me show you how it will look. Now I'm going to just paste that in. And since I already had that highlighted, just kind of overwrote that. That's nice. So now we're doing that, and that looks pretty clean. And then I just like to, it knows my style. It learns as you go. It knows that I like to, once I save everything, I like to verify indeed that the data is out there. So I think we have everything in place that we need to kind of get started, right? But the one thing that I haven't done is go back to my web controller. And for the home, I need to actually include the model so that I can do something with that. And then we'll do a model.add attribute. And let's see, developers, repo find all. So that looks pretty good. Again, thank you, Copilot, for seeing that. And let's run this. So let's go to our Spring Boot dashboard. And let's kick off the party. See what I've missed. I'm sure there's something I've missed in the haste to production here. Syntax error. Let's see. Oh, well, yes, I didn't didn't finish that out. That's probably going to be a lot happier. So continue. Let's see if I missed anything else. I got so excited that Copilot filled that in for me, I forgot to verify that the code was indeed correct. Oops. All right. Get a slight drink of coffee here. And we see that we've got, gosh, I mean, we've got our data that's sitting out there. Now, what I can do is we've got our well, let's just do this. Let's go here to our browser. Oh, it's not happy for some reason. So we'll come back to that. In fact, let's just take a look at it now. Why not? Oh, well, there's there's still code problems. So I need to, I guess, go back and check that. So let's stop this, go back to our API controller, web controller. And that looks good. Maybe I just need to restart here. So let's restart this. Copilot can check many things and catch many things, but unfortunately, it can't stop you from making silly syntax errors just because you don't catch them and you're in a rush to build. Darn the luck! All right, so we're bringing that up. Let's do this, and it's still coming up with this. So what am I missing here? Developer.age. And that's something else. Remember I mentioned that Copilot has a way of hallucinating at times. Well, we're going to need to fix that hallucination, right? So we're adding all developers there, but if we go to our index.html and I just let that paste that in, right? We don't have an age or a salary. We intentionally kept things very tight with our example, with our domain, so we could speed things along. And of course, in this case, Copilot was being a little too helpful. Thank you so much for nothing. So I'm going to save that and we'll try that once again. Yeah, so you can't just make up fields. Typically those have to be there in order to represent them properly. Yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense. So we got our simple browser and I'll just refresh that. Look at that. Okay, so that's working. It's not very pretty, but it works. And I'm just going to, because I just like to break things out here. So if I do an HTTP:8080, we can see our web page is there. It just returns it as HTML. But now I can go to hello. That works. Hello, CoffeeJUG. And then we'll go to devs. Not bad. How are we doing on time? We've got time. This is great. So we've got our basic web application created, our basic API created. Copilot has helped us a lot with those. There are a couple of things, though, that I do want to show you that are pretty handy. And that's helping you kind of reason through things that sometimes it takes you a long time to look up, or at least it does me. Your mileage may vary. And the other thing is kind of leaning into tests and deployment. So 3 things, but we'll start there. So with our API controller, actually, let's go back to our repository. With Spring Data, you have a convention that you can use to define methods and expand the capabilities of your repository proxy. So I'm going to use one of those right now. I'm going to create a public, and I want to find by the name, a public method that finds by the name and returns any developers that may match that name. Now I'm going to define this a little more carefully. And again, this is optional. You have a lot of different options at your disposal. I would encourage you to look at the Spring Data documentation to find out what all kind of options. So begin or starts with, ends with, contains, things like that. I'm going to use and that will give me the ability to search the beginning of the name, and anything after it that matches or doesn't match is fine, but it starts with this. And I'm going to expand the API controller. And again, this is basic built into Spring Data. So this isn't exactly using a Copilot, although here it's helping me, right? I'm going to provide a portion of the name and we'll see what it does. Get devs by name, string name. Now, it is missing one thing because, and of course, this is where it helps to not be a junior developer, because I'm passing this in as a path variable. Makes sense, right? This indicates that you have a path variable. I want to pass this in as a path variable. But Copilot generally gets it right. It's going to use the find by name it's going to pass that parameter, and that should get us back, hopefully, what we want. So let's go ahead and run that again. And I will anticipate that everything will work properly. We'll go to our devs. We'll see what we get there. Devs works. Now, if I start with Josh, That works. Now, if we start with J, that gets us Julian and Josh. So again, this all works exactly as we would expect. And again, that Copilot helped us get there, but that's built into Spring Data. So can we lean on Copilot even more? And of course, the answer is absolutely we can, and we plan to. So at this point, what I want to do is I'm going to insert a comment here. Search, and this is a terribly contrived example, but I just wanted to make it really supremely difficult, at least for me, and maybe not for you, but regex is not one of my strong suits, and anything that can help me with that is probably worth its weight in gold. It's probably worth using just for that particular case. So I want to search for third character of name using provided car parameter. And we'll see what it gives us. So I want to use the JPQL, or the Java Persistence Query Language option that Spring Data embraces. Now, this isn't, that's truly terrible, actually. Let me try that again, because this allows me to now show you that you don't have to accept what Copilot offers as the first option. You can scroll through, and in this case, we see that there are 3 different options. We will scroll through this and look, and that doesn't look bad. This looks, I think, better. So let's accept that. The difference, though, I don't know why it sometimes does this. It's not universal, but that's not even right there. So let's try that again. This is what I'm saying. If you kind of know what you're looking for, then it actually does help considerably. So let's see. No, I mean, it should have more than that, actually. Well, let's accept that. I actually have another project that I pulled this in from, because what happens is you shouldn't have all of this mess in there, and should have something like that. But of course, we need more. This is why I lean on this, because regex is not my thing. I'm going to bring this over, and we will. Let me pull up the example here that I've used before, and this is what I was after right there. We were close, right? Copilot was close. If we added that, we probably would have been fine. But this is Copilot generated, again, just a few hours ago. So you have to still have the wetware. Our brain is still important for keeping in that loop, so we know what's happening, so that we can verify. This is great for a start, but it requires that we verify and validate what we get back, so we know for sure the quality of the code that we're producing is the quality that we demand, that our users demand. So let's see, find by name, third character, not a 0. We don't want that. So find by name, third character. Okay. So perhaps my prompt was just a little off or something. So that's fine. We have what we need. Let's go ahead and develop our API controller to use that. And we'll say get mapping. And that looks pretty good, right? We're going to pass that in. And that also looks pretty good. And notice that Copilot learned. It learned that we needed to have that as a path variable. And that should work. So let's give that a shot. And my other Copilot over here, my dog, is sleeping in the corner and snoring. So I must be really entertaining her a lot. I can tell. She's riveted. All right. So let's go ahead and try this. We still have our devs, and that works fine, of course. What was that? Car. And we want to pass in, let's say, the third character, L for Julian. Oh, I didn't find that. So let's see. What am I missing here? Find by name, third character, path variable, car C. Let's see. Find name by third character, maybe. Let's see here. Yeah, because find name. Yeah, no, find by name like that. That should work, regardless. So let me restart this. And let's see if I got that. Oh, Actually, that makes a big difference if you devs. Yes, not found. That makes perfect sense now that I actually look at things. Yeah, so it comes back fine. Let's see. So Igor, yep. So we're all good. Everything works. And again, Copilot made regex actually much simpler than me actually trying to find the references, stumble through them yet again, and try to do something with it. Now, yeah, so we have a little bit of time left. I want to do the other two things, which are testing and some element of building the infrastructure and deployment. So let's go to our API controller here, and we see that if we look at this, I'm going to go ahead and just stop this. If we look at our code, we see that we've got a few different things. We've got a hello method. We got our devs name, so we can search by a particular name, and then a particular character, in this case, the third character of a name. So what I want to do at this point is create or go into chat and say, please create unit tests for developer API controller.java. And we'll see what we get. Again, this changes by the moment. So we'll see what we come up with this time. Oh, your response got filtered. Now, this is something that happens occasionally. And by this, and I have no specific means of knowing what's happening behind the scenes because Copilot is scanning different code. Obviously, you saw when it came up with something earlier and said, hey, this looks like these other code repositories. But when this happens, typically, I believe what happens is that it's finding at a higher level, bubbling up in the returned results list, perhaps a bit of code in a repo that is more restrictive license. So it's just going to filter that and not give that to us as we ask for it. Now, what we can do sometimes is create unit tests using at web MVC test or something to make the prompt a bit more specific, perhaps. Talking again is hard. So we'll see if that does any better for us. And it is. So sometimes if you are a little more specific and more tailored in your request, it will go ahead and work because it's not matching that larger body that perhaps can potentially run afoul of anything. And Copilot, as with most of the AIs, now I think tries to be very respectful of other people's code. In this case, I have a lot of code out there. So many times I think it finds mine and it happily refers me to my previous code, other code that I have available for examination under very non-restrictive licensing. And it will offer that up to me so that if I've done something a week or a month or a year ago, then I can go ahead and pull from that and reuse that. But in this case, we had to make this a bit more specific. What I'm going to do now is just insert this into a new file. And I'm going to save this. And we will put this not where it's just by default under source main. We'll go to source test Java, and we'll drop this here. And we'll name this developer API controller test. And of course, it doesn't have the package, so I'll go ahead and do that. And Copilot comes to the rescue again. I do like to go ahead and just check to see if there's anything I missed. In this case, it's just saying, hey, do we want to, it's flagging the word stream framework as problematic, just like it did the proper names earlier. So I'm just going to go ahead and add this to the workplace settings where it won't keep pestering us and saying there might be something wrong with that. Okay, so that all looks good. Same thing with these. But if you notice, it just pulls in the test get all devs, and that will return just fine. If we want to expand on that, we can do this. Yeah, let's not just return. Let's see what we get here. Well, that's pretty much it at this point because it didn't bring any other things in to go ahead and pre-populate. So sometimes you get a lot, sometimes you get a little. To bring up an example of what I did before, what I got before, let me just copy paste this in because I think this is a bit more reflective of how things typically go. But again, it varies, right? So test get all devs. We also have the test hello, and you can go ahead and add more tests here for other endpoints, which I would do, and I'll do if we have time to come back to, but I really want to get to the next thing and then cover any Q&A, and then if we have time, we can circle back. So let's go ahead and finish the next step. And this, by the way, if I run this, let's see, let me try to do an F2 again and see if we find any other, it's unknown, that's fine. So let's try to run the test and see what happens. And why is that not coming up here? Let's see. Let's pull this up. Let's just do a build. Let me make sure that it put this in the right spot. It did, so that's good. All right. Okay, that all looks quite happy. So let's go ahead here. And for some reason, it's not going ahead and wiring this in for me. So I will skip ahead, come back to this should time permit. The next thing I want to show you is something that was kind of an aha moment for me. And I've shown this to a crowd once before, actually last week at Spring One. And it was kind of an aha moment for them too, because once you get through all the code, and this is super helpful, right? But what happens when it's time to take this to production? So I'm going to say, create a Terraform template for this project to deploy to Azure Spring apps, for instance. Here's a basic example. So it gives us what actually may be a fairly useful starting point, and then it gives us some information about that once it finishes off. For whatever reason, it's kind of hung up there. That's interesting. There we go. Okay, so it will tell us, hey, look, here's kind of what you need to do. This script creates a resource group, a Spring Cloud service, and a Spring Cloud app. The config server get settings block is used to configure. If you have a config server with a Git repository, there's a deployment block, which actually I find to be not very useful, but again, I appreciate its effort. And then it tells you how you can go ahead and deploy your application, how you can use Terraform init, plan, and apply to make this happen. I'm going to just start with this, and we will insert this into a new file, and I'll save that. And we'll call this main.tf. We'll not drop this under that. We want this under source, and I'm going to create a new folder called Terraform, and that looks just fine. Now from there, you can tweak this, but this gives you a really good starting point for creating the infrastructure and doing so in a repeatable fashion so that you can go ahead and make your deployment and do it in, again, that repeatable fashion, consistent fashion when it's time to take your working code into production. So with that, let me stop for a moment and see if there was anything else that I really wanted or needed to cover. I think that was all of the high points. Certainly. Let me go back and finish up with this so that we can kind of cover the ending part, and then I'll answer any questions, and then we'll do whatever we need to do, right? Have coffee together. So let me go ahead and start this. We'll bring it home. We'll do the post-flight briefing. So what are those elements? Well, we brought it home. We have an application that works. We built some test cases. Again, you see that well, I'm already getting into the post-flight briefing here. So we landed. Everything is fine. The application works. All the endpoints have been exercised. The tests, as they're written, will work. But here's the post-flight briefing portion. You notice that Copilot wasn't as quick to provide those tests as I perhaps would have hoped, and that as it has done in the past. It did filter some responses. I have had it in the past provide the actual at Spring Boot test full test. I've had to scope it down. In this case, I had to scope it down just to get it to produce a test, which was very limited. It gave me one method for one of the other methods. And you can coax it into doing all of those other methods individually. But in some cases, you don't have to. Again, it's best not to think of this exactly as a one-to-one translation to two people on a flight deck of an aircraft. But in many cases, that different pardon the term, personality, that different coworker, colleague, pair programmer may have different ideas that they may voice a little differently each time you discuss something. And that certainly applies to Copilot as well, based on what it finds each time when it goes out and searches to provide a a reasonable response to the prompt that you're giving it. So your mileage may vary. Your mileage almost certainly will vary. Your kilometerage will vary each time you use it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because this is a very, very dynamic environment that changes almost by the minute and refines and hopefully gets better each time. So the thing that I would suggest is that you always assume you're going to need to keep yourself in that loop. And for best results, it helps you learn faster and produce hopefully very solid code faster. But it also can sometimes take you potentially down a path that you don't want to go. And that's where, again, as you sharpen your own abilities, you can more quickly redirect it and be more productive yet. So instead of going from a 1x developer to a 10x developer, you might go from a 1x developer to a 2x developer to a 3x to a 5x to a 10x. And I do believe that Copilot, GitHub Copilot, and other AI, generative AI-based tools are absolutely vital and essential moving forward. They are absolute force multipliers. They're absolute ways to take us and in some way become a something X developer, much more so than many other tools that we've had offered to us in the past that we've embraced, that we've loved, that we've used to great effect as developers. But certainly this has the capability now of being so much more, and it only looks to improve as time goes on. So with that, let me just share the repo link. I actually will be adding to this as I go on. I need to push the time leaf material out there, actually, now that I think about it, and probably some other things as well. But please do watch and star that repo so that you're notified when I do push changes out there. I do that partially to keep track of for myself and to share, but partially to foster conversation. So if you see something and you say, well, why did you do it that way? Chances are in this particular repo, I didn't choose to do it a particular way. I helped work with Copilot and guided it, or it guided me to do it a particular way. But I'm happy to answer questions and entertain other options and maybe refine the prompts to come back with a different way of doing things. If it makes sense, because again, the idea is to kind of showcase where Copilot is heading at this point in time. If you want to reach out to me or the book, we're both on Twitter /X at Spring Boot Book, at MKHeck. And so if you think of anything now, let's talk about it. If you think of anything down the road, 10 minutes from now or 10 hours or 10 days, please do reach out to me on Twitter, and we'll talk. So with that, let me thank you for coming. Let me shut this down. And well, let me leave that up on the screen and see if I can pull up the, yeah, so I can't do both. Darn it. But let me go over here and see if there are any questions or comments. Oh, nice. Oh, here we go. Okay. What about security? Does it expose the code that should not be disclosed? Is it safe to remain under NDA with Copilot? This is, oh yeah, so thank you for highlighting that. I was just kind of mousing over, and that helps actually quite a lot to keep focus when I look away and then look back. So yeah, there are different ways that you can isolate your code. Microsoft actually builds on the ChatGPT interface. And this is one thing, I'm glad you brought this up, because this allows me to talk about a couple or three different things. Initially, when I did this talk for the very first time, I found that Copilot Chat did not give me a Terraform script that was worth anything. It was just wretched. But I went to Bing Chat, which uses OpenAI Enterprise, I think it was called at the time, or something. The naming is, for me, is just terrible because it's a bit fluid, as is the whole field actually right now. But I guess that's fair. But with Bing Chat, I was able to generate a really pretty solid Terraform script. In the meantime, all of that functionality has come out of Bing Chat for coding and code and infrastructure as code and things like that. But Copilot has really muscled up in the time being. So I'm able to use that. So I start this conversation by saying that as time goes on, as sensibilities are increased, as security and care is taken to not use code that may potentially run afoul of any particular license that's in that particular repo, you're going to see things shift. And that is frankly what I think a lot of this is. When you, hey, this worked yesterday and now it's coming up with different results. It may work, but it may not work the same way as it did yesterday. Will it expose your code? No. If you put something out on GitHub and you put it in a repo with a very permissive license, like I MIT license pretty much all of my stuff, so it's about as permissive as you can get. Then yeah, that's fair game. It will use that. It will disclose that. If you have a restrictive license on there, it will not use that. You saw in the one case it popped up and said, "Hey, look, this matches public repos." That's permissive, but it's somewhere in between. It's still permissive, but it's wanting to warn you that you may be getting close to maybe stepping up to a line that you may not want to cross. So there are safeguards in place. Those safeguards will be refined as time goes on. If you have internal company code, you're probably not publishing it publicly on GitHub anyway. And it does learn from your code that you're using, that you've used GitHub Copilot with locally as well. So I hope that answers the question. Pardon me. If not, we can take another run at it again. So OpenAI, what's the relationship between Copilot and OpenAI's GPT-3 technology? I believe it is GPT 3.5 Turbo. I could be wrong on that, but that I believe is what's running behind the scenes for Copilot. And they do typically rev that as time goes on. That's why I'm having trouble remembering where it's sitting right now, but I believe that's correct. Can it be used in non-programming related tasks such as writing documentation or content? That's a great question. And to be honest with you, I find it incredibly useful when I'm trying to write up something. I use VS Code for that as well. And I will start off with a blank slate, and it depends on the file type. So I use a lot of ASCII doc, Markdown, things like that. And if I start out writing something, Copilot will see that and go, let me help you along. Maybe it pities me. I don't know. But it will offer some, the next 2, 3, 10 sentences in a paragraph. And sometimes it is really good. I can hit tab and it'll accept that. And then I can tweak that and make minor changes. Sometimes it's not so good. It's generative. So it's using probabilities. And I do want to say, I don't necessarily get into, in this particular talk, I don't get into the reasoning, if you will, the mechanisms behind the scenes. I look at the API and the interfaces and how we use it to interact with it as developers, but it is going with basically probabilities and weights and what it thinks makes sense to string together different tokens, different words or phrases to come up with the logical next step in what you started off. You list a word or 5 words or a sentence, and it takes that and runs with it. Sometimes it does a great job. Sometimes it's very repetitious. So you'll get the same sentence 2 or 3 times in a paragraph, but sometimes it gives you enough of an idea that you can use that to start with, tweak it, revise it, and then go to the next paragraph. So I use it all the time for things like that. I use it in VS Code. And then if I want to, put that into an email or something, you can do that. Of course, we have access to various different copilots within Outlook email, but I still find I do most of my work in editors. So yes, I would encourage you to check that out and try it. It does work really well for that. Okay, so Julia, does GitHub Copilot provide explanations for the code it generates? Oh yes, actually, you know what? There is. I still am sharing my screen. Let me show this. So if I want to, let's say I look at this. I wonder if I can get this to do this now since it's already written. Let me see if I can break this. Find something. So now if I hover, view problem. No, it's not going to give me what I was looking for. I was trying to, I guess, let me back this out and just put that back. So now if I close this and get mapping / something, public iterable developer, get something, find something. Okay, so it's oops, let me not get quite so carried away here. So there's that. Now if I do this, that's still not going to do it. Okay, well, that's fine. There is a way when you look at this, there's a quick fix, which actually, yeah, here we go. I don't use that feature very often, but it is there, and once in a while it comes in really handy. You can fix it using Copilot, or you can explain it. So it'll tell you, hey, I'm thinking. Kind of interesting. choice of words. It seems like find something method is not defined in your repository interface. You need to define this method. However, the implementation of this method depends on what you want to achieve with it. So it gives you a way to do something there and to solve the problem. So yes, it actually can offer explanations and help you understand where it came from and what you need to do to fix your code, as well as when it spits out code, when it offers it, and then when you accept it, and even when it works, it can help explain it in that way. So that's a useful tool as well. Every change and every restart, when will Spring bring dev mode? Well, actually, we have, I say we, I'm again not on the Spring team now still, but there is a dev tools mode. I just, this is kind of my workflow, so apologies for that. Can GitHub Copilot be used for writing tests and test cases? Primarily, yes. As you saw, again, your mileage varies dramatically from time to time. I've had it fill out an entire set of unit tests. I've had it do one at a time. And again, my prompts are fairly consistent, I feel like, because I kind of do, like most developers, I do a lot of the same things over and over with minor variations on a theme. However, sometimes it does things a little differently and approaches it. So sometimes you have to kind of prime it and feed it line by line and tell it, hey, that's great, but can you add this and whatnot? So yes, it's very useful for test cases. What I will say is that if you subscribe to test first philosophy, which I typically do, ironically, because of the way I presented this, with Copilot, typically you want to, again, prime that pump. So I find that if you create a very, very simplistic API, and then use that to create the test cases, then you can start in with your, what I typically do is I'll write a comment, create a unit test that tests this, and then use that, and then build the code from that. So I test first and then satisfy the test, as you might expect in a test first environment. But I always start with a very simple API or simple main class method, and then build from that, and then expand on that to the complexity, and then use that to drive the code from there. So it's kind of a symbiosis. Daily Drive Copilot plugin with IntelliJ IDEA. Now, I use IntelliJ IDEA a lot. That's probably my number one daily driver when it comes to code. However, with IntelliJ IDEA, it doesn't have Copilot chat yet. And that is a program you have to be accepted into. So it still uses the same Copilot behind the scenes, but it's an extra step you go through to get approval to get access to that. It is available in VS Code and VS Code Insiders. It is not yet available in IntelliJ IDEA. I know there has been, because I went out to log a request for it, and there's already a request out there with a lot of support for it. If you want to see Copilot chat involved in IDEA, then by all means, add on like that and follow that enhancement request, because I think it's coming. I suspect it is. It's just a matter of time and resources. So yeah, I love me some IntelliJ IDEA with VS Code Insiders. I can show you a little bit more. So that's why I use that today. Chat notifications. Do you know by any chance when such features might arrive? Oh, I guess I covered that. Okay, so Lex, it looks like you and I are on the same wavelength on that. But yes, I would love to see that in there today. Chances are it's coming pretty soon, but I don't know. I don't have any inside baseball on that one. So yeah, so I mean, I guess that's pretty much it. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I wanted to cover before I let you go, but I think that might be all. Let me throw the repo out here one more time and contact information. Yeah, so star and watch the repo. I will be adding things, updating it. It's a very, very dynamic field. Oh, the one thing I did want to point out as well, and I should have mentioned this as well. So if you have VS Code and you want to do the Visual Studio Code Insiders, as it says, get the latest release each day. So that's not probably for the faint of heart, but again, I've found no stability issues whatsoever. So yeah, check it out. It might work for you. I've got mine set up with high contrast mode. I've got it feeding everything the latest, greatest, and so far so interesting. So the Copilot, if you want to look at this, your AI pair programmer, obviously, if you want to subscribe to this, if you're a student, great. I think you can get a student plan at no charge. If you're just out there as a developer and you're freelancing, you can do $10 a month or $100 per year. You can get it for business. If your organization, many organizations have seen the value in this and have purchased this for the development teams. I highly recommend that. And again, I had a conversation with a colleague who I really respect, who was saying that he'd gotten the recommendation that it really pays off the best for senior devs, so they weren't necessarily considering it as much for junior devs. I think that's probably very limited in the approach or the mindset, because if you're not going to cut off your junior devs from Stack Overflow or from searching the internet for code samples, which we've all done, let's be honest, and some of those have been great, some have been terrible, and many have been somewhere in between, where you kind of have to piece together a dozen of those to make something workable in your mind or in actuality. Don't limit them from accessing this tool, because this tool gives, again, that force multiplier and helps you be so much more effective, so much quicker, more quickly. And of course, the GitHub Copilot chat plugin for IntelliJ, as well as VS Code. Here's the HashiCorp Terraform template that typically you would go to for Java deployments. And again, that didn't quite get it right when I asked it to create the Terraform template, but it got us a really good head start to where we can quickly spin things up and get things deployed and into production. So with that, I will go back to this. If there are no further questions, I'll let you get back to your evening and whatever you may have planned. But if you do think of anything down the road, again, 10 minutes, 10 days, 10 years, well, maybe not 10 years. I don't know. We'll see. Please do let me know. Best way to reach me is on Twitter/X at MKHeck. My DMs are open. If you don't want to share any questions with the whole world, that's fine. Just DM me. If you want to share them publicly, that's fine too. But thanks for coming, and hope to see you around. Alexei, Igor, how are we doing?
So, Igor, I'm already on live, correct? Yeah. So,
Thanks.
Mark, thank you for this incredible talk. Yeah, thank you to our partners, Sombra and Grid Dynamics. And Mark, you are able to choose 2 people who are gonna receive the JetBrains licenses.
Oh,
You can choose. Yeah. You can choose the best questions, and those people are gonna receive the license.
Oh, well, that's going to be tough here. Let's see. I think probably, yeah, I'm going to have to go with Irina because she asked about writing documentation or content, and absolutely, that's something that I love to use it for. Even when it was kind of early days and it was a little shaky, that was something that I found immediately useful. So go with Irina on that one. And then Lex, I guess, on the other one, although, gosh, it's so tough because everybody asks such great questions, but yeah, we'll I guess stop with that. So Irina and Lex and everyone else, thanks for coming, and thanks for asking such great questions and being engaged, and go forth and Copilot.
Yeah, okay, guys. Irina and Alex, don't forget to message us in our social medias, and we gonna send to you licenses. So, guys, thank you for joining, and connect to us in our social medias. See you around. Bye.
Bye, everyone.